All right, so now we are into state powers, so it makes sense that we're now going to cover some of state government. We are basically going to run through the executive branch today, and it should not be a terribly long lecture. It's a little different than the federal government, but for a lot of things, very similar qualifications, very similar powers. So we're going to point out some differences and some similarities. All right, first, the head executive is the governor. So we don't have a president, we have a governor of a state. Just like, and this kind of has roots in the idea that back during the colonial era, the king would appoint a royal governor, or someone whose job it was literally to govern people. Qualification: you have to be 30 years old, a U.S. citizen for at least 5 years, and you have to have lived in North Carolina for 2. So much less stringent than the presidency requirements, which requires that you be a natural-born citizen, 35 years old, and I believe the residency requirement is 14 years. Got to be in here. Term of office is 4 years. You can only serve 2 consecutive terms. So yeah, that's the same as the president now. The only difference with governor is that they can sit out for 1 term, then jump back in and run for another term again. And James Hunt did that most recently. So James, like Hunt High School, yeah, that guy. Governor and lieutenant governor run separately. Now, here's the weird thing. The lieutenant governor and the governor can be in different parties. And I think that's like the case right now. It's Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest, who I believe is a Republican, and then you got Roy Cooper, who's a Democrat, being the governor. So you do have issues there where you might have someone who's in the executive branch at odds with the other person around party lines. Duties of the governor. They are much like the president, the chief executive. They're a symbolic leader. You see them do things like they'll sign out executive orders making parks and other little things, like today is North Carolina's National Michael Jordan Day, that kind of stuff, like making up holidays, that kind of stuff. They also are the commander-in-chief of the National Guard. So the National Guard, like the North Carolina National Guard, he's the commander-in-chief. He can order them into action, like when Hurricane Matthew came through, he can send those people, the National Guard, in to kind of help and manage disaster relief, that kind of stuff. He can also bring them in to like break up riots or if there's something really terrible happening. He appoints many, many, many state officials, like obviously his cabinet, other members, and that does change. Most recently, when Pat McCrory was governor, there were a lot of people he could appoint, but that was done by legislation. Basically, the state legislature said, we're going to open up all these other positions to unqualified appointments. Not meaning that they weren't qualified to do the job, but basically meaning there's no real check on the governor's power to appoint new people. When Roy Cooper came in, who's a Democrat, but he had a hostile legislature. The legislatures are run by Republicans. So the Republicans' response was to basically cut in half, I think it might be more than half, the number of appointed positions the governor could actually appoint. So it becomes a political pawn when the parties are at odds in one branch from the other. But that's the idea. You kind of want it that way because you don't want one branch running roughshod over everybody else or one party running roughshod over everybody else. That checks and balances principle exists at the state level as well, so keep that in mind. Coordinating work with other state agencies, so the SBI, basically anybody who's any law enforcement, because they're the executive. The governor is the chief executive of the state. He enforces law. He may grant pardons or reduce sentences for those convicted of crimes, and I should change that to say state crimes. Roy Cooper can never pardon somebody for committing treason because that's a federal crime. It's a national level crime. Only President Trump could do that at this point. Same thing the other way around. Trump cannot pardon somebody for a state crime they commit. If you commit murder and are convicted or given the death penalty in North Carolina for a state crime of murder, President Trump can't do lickety-squat about it. Doesn't matter what they're doing. The governor almost acts as the ambassador for the state. So there's the conference of governors. Anytime one state is at odds with the other, Roy Cooper will kind of come out and talk with other governors from all around. So Nikki Haley, when she was governor of South Carolina, was in close talks with Pat McCrory. They were both Republicans, and they're right next door to each other. Governors tend to interact with each other much like ambassadors would interact with each other. All right, the lieutenant governor has to have the same qualifications as the governor, just like the VP of the United States has to have the same qualifications as the president. They have to be able to take over. The president they are the president of the Senate, just like the VP is the president of the Senate at the national level, and they serve on commissions and work with the governor. So the lieutenant governor in North Carolina, at the very least, has a lot of power ingrained in their office, whereas at the federal level, there's nothing in the Constitution that really gives the vice president much power. They serve as president of the Senate, and that's really about it. Now, if like in a situation like where Barack Obama really liked Joe Biden, he gave Joe Biden a lot of tasks to do and things to accomplish, whether it was negotiating with other countries like the Iran deal, all that stuff. But that was up to President Obama. The vice president, when it was Joe Biden, did not have the ability to say, "Hey, I'm vice president. I get to go do this," because he would have said, "No, you can't, Joe. You only get to do what I tell you can do." And the same thing going back to Kennedy, when Lyndon B. Johnson was John F. Kennedy's vice president, he was bored. He never got to do anything. Basically, he just had to always be separate and away from the president in case he died so that he could take over and wouldn't die with him. And he often said he felt like a ghoul because he couldn't really do anything, and they wouldn't. And the Kennedy brothers, who were kind of like in charge of government, wouldn't let LBJ actually do anything while he was in office as vice president. Council of State is 8 department heads chosen by voters, 4-year terms with unlimited re-election. Operate independently of the governor. So this is a separate group of people. This is the treasurer, auditor, commission of labor. You can read the rest. So it's almost like the cabinet at the state level, at least our state, North Carolina, our cabinet is elected by the people. So again, you have the issue, well, what do you do when the governor is a Democrat and let's say they elect a whole bunch of other people who are Republicans to be in his cabinet or to operate as cabinet? Like a lot of y'all don't like me using the mouse, but whatever. The superintendent of public instruction, he's a Republican. He's a 33-year-old Republican out of Winston-Salem. Roy Cooper is a highly experienced politician and former attorney general of the Democrat Party. They might have some issues coming up. All right, the governor's cabinet. These are the guys that actually are appointed by the governor. So this past slide right here, these look like cabinet members almost because they match some of the same exact department heads at the federal level in name and duty, but it almost wouldn't make sense to have all those guys be Republicans and then you have Roy Cooper over there as a Democrat. Nothing would be functional. So there is an actual cabinet appointed by the governor. There's 10 department heads, and these will change with the new governor being elected. So these don't hang around after the fact. Now, this is the part that's a little different. In North Carolina, and there's no slides on this, so this is something you have to take notes on your own. Just a black screen to stare at and listen to my voice, so my apologies. In North Carolina, we have what is known as a bifurcated executive. And I'm not referring to governor and lieutenant governor. I'm referring specifically to the governor's office and the attorney general. The attorney general and the governor both interact together, but they can be of different parties. So Roy Cooper was attorney general while Pat McCrory was the governor. Republican on one side, Democrat on the other. They are elected by the people separately. The attorney general is the chief prosecutor for the state. He chooses whether or not to charge someone with a crime. At the federal level, if the president wants to charge somebody with a crime, he just has to tell the attorney general to do it. In North Carolina, if Pat McCrory, or in this case, if Roy Cooper, now that he's governor, if he wants someone charged with a crime, he's got to get the attorney general to do it voluntarily. It's bifurcated. That power is separated out. It's almost like the prosecutorial power or the power to convict someone of a crime, or at least propose a prosecution that could lead to conviction for crime. The governor doesn't have a hand in that. They can have influence because there's politics and there can always be political influence. But overall, the Attorney General of North Carolina has sole discretion on whether or not to charge someone with a state-level crime. And it makes sense if you're talking about things like public corruption. You don't want if the governor were to be charged with public corruption, like taking bribes, well, if the governor's in charge of actually being the person to take like a prosecution or take charges out on himself, is he ever going to do it? No, it wouldn't make any sense. So the AG's office basically can charge a sitting governor. They can charge sitting politicians with crimes, corruption, and most often you'll see that happen in Wake County because that's where the seat of government is. So you'll see Wake County being the kind of arm of the state when they're charging high-level officials of crime. So the AG's office has a huge impact separate from the governor's office. The law enforcement, as far as controlling the police, all that fun stuff is there. But the AG is almost like the super district attorney, the super prosecutor for the state. They also handle other initiatives like they handle things like, let's say it's now springtime. Everyone's trying to get work done on their houses. Well, a big thing that happens every year are phony contractors who try to bilk old people out of a bunch of money. And they say, pay me $1,000 now, I'll build you a porch in 3 days. They take $1,000 and you never see them again. That's a common scam, and the AG's office is always the one putting those warnings out, basically dealing with high-level crime that's pervasive in the state. So understand that the term you're looking for is a bifurcated, so cut in half, executive branch, and that's at the state level between the governor's office and the attorney general's office. So thanks for watching again.